Okay, welcome back. This is video number 3 in the Bouncing Ball series. In this video, I'm going to show you how to clean up our animation. We're going to start getting into the rotation and the squash and stretch. One thing I want to show you at the very beginning, though, is if you did turn on your autosave and you go into your projects folder, wherever you have this project saved, and into this project, this is the Bouncing Ball project for me, you can see you have all these folders, and we've talked about where your source images go, and then we automatically save that beach ball into there. But then up here on the top you see autosave, and if you open it up you'll see we have all of these autosaves that have been done since I started this, and you can imagine after a while this will get filled up, because if you work on a project for many days, hours at a time, and every 10 minutes you're making a save. So you'll probably want to come up with some method of cleaning this out a little bit. You may not want to delete everything. You may want to save a couple saves as backup perhaps. But you certainly probably don't need every single one of these saved in there. Another thing is this scene. If you ever go looking for the scenes, they're under scenes, and this is the project that I'm currently working on, the first iteration of the bouncing ball. And then when we get to rendering, we'll have this one called images, and when we render things out, they'll go into here. Alright, we'll talk more about that later though. So here we are with our bouncing ball, and I'm still in this quad view here so that we can kind of get a feel for the animation. And you notice that when I move it, only one of these frames move, and that's because that was the last frame I was in. If I were to select the top one here and move, you can see that my ball is actually moving from top to bottom. Okay, and talk a little bit now about some of these views. Why do I have the bouncing ball texture here but not over here? Again, if I hit 6 in that viewport, it changes the mode of that viewport. Now you can see that my ball is actually in that viewport with the texture on it. Over here, under the graph editor, with the beach ball selected at the very top here, you can see that I have all of these different colored lines, and some of them have curves, some of them are straight. So let's take a look at the reason why. Translate X. If we click on the Translate X, again, that's a change in position. And this position, X, is actually, if we look at it from the top view here, X is actually from left to right, so where the red arrow points this direction. And we did not make any changes this direction for this particular animation. So the line is straight on the 0 because we've made 0 changes, but every single time we did set a keyframe for Translate X, so that if at some point we wanted to come in and cause some changes, we could do that, but yet still keep our initial starting point on the line for our object, in this case the ball. Translate Y, if we take a look at our front or side views, maybe the side view would be better, we can see that the green arrow is the up and down. It correlates to the green line here, and we know that we've moved this up and down. If we move the time slider, we can see the ball go up and down. And as we move it along, you can see that it's up. We have the up curve here, and in the down position here at frame 25, we have the ball all the way down. So Translate Y is the up and down movement. Translate Z is a straight line. Translate Z for us was the distance, and if we take a look at, let's see which one is the best one here for showing this. Maybe side view. So as we move along here in the side view, you see the Z down here. This is the distance, so we're moving it straight. And the distances that we set it, so every 25 frames, roughly, you can see that we have these little diamonds, and every single one of those represents a distance that we moved it from the right for the z-axis. So we moved along the z-axis in this viewpoint. And if I grab the time slider, you can see that happen. And since we're looking at the time slider right now, one thing you'll notice are these hash marks, these long gray hash marks. If you look, it's 24 frames here, it's 48 frames here, and so on and so forth every 24 frames. So every second roughly, or every 24 frames per second, we have a hash mark. Now if we move down to here where we set absolutely no keyframes, remember we didn't set any keyframes for rotate at this point. There are no lines along here, just the initial keyframe that we set at the frame number 1. Right here we have that diamond, and that's it. There are no others in any of the X, Y, or Z rotations. Now scale is all going to be a straight line at this point because we've not done any of the squash and stretch. So for every single one of these on the X, Y, and Z, they're just going to be a straight line at this point. But we did set a keyframe every single time. And that'll make sense as to why we did that once we come back to the Animate, to doing the squash and stretch. Okay. Now I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to find my ball, and here in my top view, if I move my timeline, the ball moves upwards. And that's the direction that the ball is moving, and I think that's the direction I want to set rotation in as well. So by selecting it up here and hitting E on my key, I can E on my keyboard, I can start to move it forward. So I can see that if you look over here and rotate X, see how it's kind of turned pink? It's telling me that I have not set a keyframe for that, but yet I've done some movement. And also it's going in the negative direction. With knowing that, I'm going to go ahead and change this back to 0, or Control Z, either way. Okay, and at Control Z, everything's set back to 0. I'm going to leave my keyframe for my rotation at 0, start point here on my first keyframe. I'm going to move my slider all the way down to the end, to 200. Now I have to decide, through this animation of several seconds, how many times is it going to rotate? So in about 8.5 seconds of time, do I think it's going to rotate once, twice? How many times do I want it to rotate? Now we already know that the ball is moving kind of slow, and I'm kind of giving it that character of being maybe a large, slow moving, not in a hurry to get anywhere type of beach ball. And if that's the case, maybe the rotation won't be quite so fast either. And I might go ahead and set my X rotation to maybe -720. I want it to rotate in the direction that the ball is moving, and see how that looks all the way at the end. And I'm going to set that keyframe at 720. So now if I go back to my side view here, my perspective view, so I can kind of see the ball, and I take my time slider, you can see that my ball is rotating as it moves. So if I hit the play button, as it moves through there, I'm going to get 2 full rotations of my ball. Is that going to be enough, or should I give it a little bit more? And then there at the end, it doesn't rotate at all. So we're going to have to deal with that as well. But I think once it hits the ground at that last bounce, I think we're going to get a faster rotation. So I'll probably go ahead and stop this right now and think about how I want my rotation to look. So at the last bounce, I'm going to select back my ball so I can get my curves back. And I move it to the end, to the very last bounce, right there at 175. See, I have a rotation there. And at this point, it's telling me that it's rotated to -688. And then if I moved it all the way to the end, we should see my -720 right there. What if I gave it, maybe if I said I wanted it to rotate maybe 4 times by the time it got to that position right there, and then once it hits at 175, that's where it stays on the ground, and then I'm going to get another rotation because it speeds up at that point. So if I wanted to get 4 rotations and it does 360 degrees for each rotation, I may want to set that position So let me go ahead and set that at negative 1440. And set that keyframe. Now let's see what that looks like for my animation. See, I'm getting a much faster rotation. Kind of feeling that that looks a little better. And then it does this backwards rotation because it's going backwards to negative 320. Or 720 rather. So we get that backwards rotation, which we can get rid of, not a problem. So I'm going to go to 175. I'm going to go all the way to my 200. I know that I set my last one at 175 to negative 1440. And since I want that short distance to look like the ball really speeds up in its rotation, I'm going to add 720 to 1440. Make sure I put a negative number in front of it. So I'm going to add 2 rotations to that. And then I'm going to change my final keyframe here at my 200. At my frame 200, I'm going to set this keyframe at negative 2160. And make sure I set the keyframe. And now let's see what this does for my total animation as far as my rotation. And the reason why we're doing rotation first is because when we get to the squash and stretch, we want to make sure that we have the animation for the rotation correct. Because if we do the squash and stretch first, and then we rotate the ball, our squash and stretch may be totally off base from where it needs to be. Alright, that last little bounce there, I'm not really digging this little kind of thing here. But I think once we start adjusting the curves to kind of fix the way the balance is working, we may be able to clean that up. Okay, so if we take a look at our editor here, and we can either move it along with the yellow bar here, or you can grab the time slider down here, whichever you prefer. And we get to some of the points. One of the things is we're getting this kind of unrealistic looking movement of the ball as it comes down and hits the ground. We get this kind of nice lazy curve up, and you can see that down here on the translate Y green line. Probably want this to be a little bit sharper. As it hits the ground, it bounces up sharper, and then we get this slow easy curve as it comes up over the top and starts to fall back down. So what I think we want to do is we want to take all of these sections here, and we probably want to make them so they're a little stiffer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the button that says break, or I'm going to right click and break my tangent here. So if you double click on these diamonds, you'll get the bars. And then we can right click on them, and I can break a tangent, and what that does is it allows me to move one side without affecting the other. And I'm going to want to make this a little tighter, I think, so more of a straight line up, less of a nice easy curve at this point. Don't want to get too carried away, but let's go ahead and try that for all of these. And again, these are nice long curves. If your ball was heavier and your animation was faster, you'd have much deeper drops and then much more steep ups for the ball. But because I'm making this kind of a nice, slow-moving, lazy ball, we're going to have much smaller curves to work with. And this last one, the way it falls down like this, I have to mess around with that separately and see how that works, but let's see how this looks first. See, the problem is right here as it does that curve over. I think maybe as it runs out of steam, what I'm feeling is maybe it needs to not have such a slow moving deep curve. And maybe what it needs is more of a, let's see how that looks. You can always undo it. I'm going to drop that down a little sharper. Alright, let's hit play and see what it looks like. See how the sharper ups and more of a slow curve as it goes over. May have to do something with that rotation, I don't know. I also know that we made this standard 25 frames or 1 second for each one of these. So what we really need to do is from 6 meters it was about 1.1 second, and then at the 4.5 meters it really would be just under 1 second before it did its next fall. So here this is far to the right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it to be one line just in front of the 1 second. So we're going to give this time a little bit shorter. And you can see I can just click on it with my left mouse button, and I can just grab it and drag it. And now with this next one, we did this at about probably about 3 meters if I remember right. So let's fix that to, it's about 3/4 of a second. So we really need to be somewhere more around the 64 time frame. So if I click on that and I drag it to the right, we may have to adjust the height after we get all of this fixed. And then the next one is actually, sorry, that's the down. We probably want to put this one somewhere right around a second. That was too far over for that. The up one right here is where we need to be more around. So this is a full second. So somewhere around here is about 3/4 of a second. And then we did this one here, so we probably want to maybe keep it around 3/4 of a second for a little bit more realistic look from the last time it bounced. So maybe right there at the half point. And then here as well, we need to move this timeline over, and that was, I think we were roughly at 1 meter. And that takes just under a half a second to drop. So from here, roughly here is a half second. Let's see, right about there is about a half second. And then we hit the ground somewhere around here, but again, let's put this one somewhere just under a half second from that one. And this one we can leave alone because this is our final timeline. Let's see what that does for all of this. Okay, we have an issue right here at this timeline. We're going to have to all right, go ahead and hit stop. It's right around in here where it just sort of sits and spins. And partly because it's finishing out the rotation there before it gets to the 1400. Somewhere around there is getting to the So the 1440 is really right there. On this timeline, which is at 175, which makes sense. This is where we set it before. So what we need to do is we need to actually move the rotation from 175 back here to the last time where it hits now, somewhere around 131 or 2. So let's find that in our rotation. And this was the rotation X, remember? And there it is. And we need to now move it somewhere around here. So if I click on it, I can grab it and I can rotate it so that it's roughly in the right spots. And let's see how that looks when we do that. And we got a little bit more cleaning up to do. I'm going to go ahead and stop this video now, and that'll put it right at 20 minutes or so, 21 minutes, and let you go ahead and experiment around with the different graph editor tools and try it out. And then in the next video we'll finish up our rotation, getting that cleaned up, and we'll start the squash and stretch part of it.